Hey yo, what's good though? Soul here, and welcome back to the story mode. So I think it's clear to everybody, mystery to nobody, that Pokemon has been in a very weird place with a lot of people for the last decade. I made a video a little while back talking about us being within the potential dark ages of Pokemon. Simply put, Pokemon has never been more controversial than it has within these last couple of years with these last couple of entries. From the release of very clearly unfinished games to prices that don't really reflect the quality of those games, people have been very hit or very miss when it comes to Pokemon lately. And this is coming from somebody that enjoyed their time with Scarlet and Violet and enjoyed their time with Legends EA. But I'm not ignorant. Those games have massive flaws that I have pointed out time and time again for the last 3+ years. So now, here we are on the horizon of Pokemon Winds and Waves, and one of the things that was most interesting about the announcement of the game was the fact that everybody was excited about the fact that it doesn't come out until 2027, likely late 2027. Thankfully, the game in its first showcase looked pretty damn good off rip. However, that alongside the fact that this game is likely going to be a holiday release at the end of next year, and we could potentially be looking at some of the best quality control Pokemon has ever showcased. However though, I'm going to step down a little bit and set my expectations to cautiously optimistic, probably alongside everybody else. Cause frankly, you really never know what we're actually going to get when it comes to this franchise, so we'll keep our eyes out. But thinking about all of this has made me ponder a question. Is Pokemon as a franchise actually improving, or is it getting worse? Obviously though, the answer to that isn't necessarily black and white. Ever since transitioning to the home console era, there have been a lot of solid aspects and a lot of not solid aspects. Things that worked and things that didn't. Which is precisely why I decided to open up that discussion to you guys. Just last week in the Discord and in the YouTube community tab, I put up a poll asking you guys if you felt if Pokemon was improving or not. The actual answer was a lot more surprising than I thought. At the very least, from the people that voted on either, they mostly agree that Pokemon is indeed improving. But again, I don't think it's as simple as a resounding yes. So, that being said, in classic video response fashion, I gathered up all of your guys' thoughts and opinions in regards to this specific topic. Before we get into it, a quick reminder that if you ever want priority on these response videos, make sure to join up in the Discord where we have real fun conversations with a very solid community, and it's definitely the best way to keep up with everything that I'm up to. I post prompts for video responses in the video ideas tab, so you can respond there. However, if you have any ideas for videos that you would like me to do in the future, you can post them there as well. That being said though, I think we've yammered long enough. Let's go ahead and get through your responses. Let's kick things off with the Discord side first. Kicking things off this time, we've got the homie Ear, who says, I think it is. Yeah. Like the series has always been, it's been in relative baby steps. But even with that aside, I found Scarlet and Violet to be an improvement over Sword and Shield, and the Legends games to be an improvement relative to both those games. Almost certain Winds and Waves will be better than Scarlet and Violet. And that right there is kind of the baseline question, right? Every time I would do a review or even a versus video, I would not only compare the game to itself, but I would compare it to its predecessors and ask myself, did this game do this thing better than the last game? So far, in a lot of cases, I think it's safe to say that most of them have done a decent job improving on what the last game did beforehand. I'm sure somebody's gonna bring it up, so I won't delve too much into it, but I feel personally that there are a lot of things that Legends EA did better than Pokemon Legends Arceus. However, there are definitely a few aspects that it didn't quite match up to, but the overall vibe I get is that they definitely learned a lot from Arceus and improved on a lot for Legends EA. I know a lot of people might not feel that same way, but playing through both of those games multiple times, I don't think that I'm crazy in believing what I believe with that. And you know, basing it off of public reception, I think that them making Winds and Waves better than Scarlet and Violet is the easiest possible task that they could take on as a team. I'm so serious. Based on what we've seen, Winds and Waves doesn't look like it's held together with popsicle sticks, so already a vast improvement. Next to that, we've got the homie Jake, who says, I feel like overall, since the release of Sword and Shield, the games have improved. Narratively, Sword and Shield was buns, but it was a good looking game for the most part. The wild area left a lot to be desired, and it was very linear, but it wasn't bad. Scarlet and Violet improved a ton narratively, and the characters were great, especially with the DLC. However, the game looked like straight booty cheeks and was just kinda empty. I think Legend ZA was a good mix of these two. Graphically, it looked pretty good. Good story, great characters, and engaging gameplay for the most part. Not the DLC. I think if they can take everything they have done well and implement that into Winds and Waves, we will have a great game, and my answer would be definitely yes, they are improving. However, we will just have to wait and see. Love you, Daddy Soul. That last bar was insane. Anyway, I definitely agree on that front. Something I learned a little bit more recently is that I'm more of a narrative-driven person than I realized. So if you have like a fun cast and a solid world and an interesting story going on within that world, there's a good chance that even if the gameplay is a little murky, I will fight through just so I can finish out that narrative and see what kind of ending those characters have. For example, one of my favorite game series of all time, Xenoblade, did not start out that way because of the gameplay. I used to absolutely despise the combat system, which is why I never cared to get through Xenoblade Chronicles 1 or X. However, eventually I forced my way through Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and truly understood what was going on with the system, but I was also so enamored with the world and the characters and the story that I had to find out what was going on with the rest of the franchise. And now, I've played through each game a few times, and now it is one of my favorite series ever. Suffice to say, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet got me to wade through murky waters in the form of its gameplay because of how broken the game was, solely because I wanted to experience that narrative. Like I always say, Pokemon has the potential to tap into some really deep narratives if they really wanted to. However, you could just definitely tell surface level that they are getting better and a lot more unique with the stories that they're telling. And I do definitely agree that Pokemon Legends EA did have a little bit of what we were lacking from both of the recent generational titles within this one, even though it's not a generational title in of itself. Moving on, we've got Big Dog Ren, who says, I think it has improved, but very slowly, which is the norm for Pokemon. Like, it has always made improvements slowly, just look at Red and Blue to Leaf Green and Fire Red, or X and Y to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Each game in between slowly improved. Another thing the Switch era doesn't get enough praise for is them being willing to experiment more, especially after Sword and Shield, which was our last typical playthrough. Legends Arceus changed the formula to focus on catching, Scarlet and Violet was our first full open world adventure, and ZA tried to turn Pokemon from a typical adventure game into a more story-focused experience revolving around your crew and the random-ass people you meet along the way. Yes, gang, I am 100% entirely with you on the fact that while it has been slow improvement, it has been general improvement overall. But the one thing I definitely agree with more than anything is absolutely the fact that they are more willing to experiment and try new things that they haven't done before with the franchise. For a very long time, I needed something like Pokemon Legends to be a presence. I just didn't know how they were going to go about doing that. But now that we have Legends as a sister series to co-release alongside the generational titles, I feel like I'm going to be more than satisfied as that continues to improve down the line. Especially because they've created a situation that doesn't necessarily need to build around the typical gym formula that they've cultivated throughout the mainline generational titles. They're more free to delve into more characters and more stories and worlds that we didn't get enough time to explore in depth before. Never in my life would I have guessed before Legends EA that we would get a sequel to X and Y. And regardless of how that turned out or how Legends Arceus turned out, I'm glad that we now have the opportunity for prequels and sequels and just general new stories within this hella developed world that we've come to know our entire lives. Which is why I think it's really unfortunate that I agree, that's something that people definitely take for granted when considering what Legends EA is. But hey, you know, at the very least, slow improvement is better than no improvement. Following that, we've got the homie Elliot, who says, in the 3D era of Pokemon, obviously it took a fairly huge step back in terms of the games in general. A huge step back with the game's overall art style and graphics thanks to them not being experienced with 3D, unlike 2D, which they pretty much mastered at the time. In the Switch era, we got a lot of buggy, laggy games due to several reasons, the worst case being Scarlet and Violet. But I think ever since the Switch 2, it's gotten better. Of course, we got the whole Switch 2 update for Scarlet and Violet, but in Legend ZA, both versions, including Switch 1, worked without any lag or bugs. The Switch 2 exclusive Pokopia has no bugs or lag that have caught my attention either. So, from a technical standpoint, it seems to be improving, which is partly because of the new system, but also because they spend more time on their games now. The graphics are also improving. I think the stories and characters have generally gotten better. Sword and Shield is the exception. I say generally because I don't think they've beaten the Gen 5 storyline. So, in short, they took a dive down in the Switch era, but seems to be doing better now. I feel like the people who have paid the most constant attention to the development of Pokemon as a franchise their entire lives are definitely in agreement that swapping to 3D when they were not ready to do so with a very strict timeline to get a Pokemon game out on the 3DS before it had been too late was one of the biggest downfalls in the series that set Game Freak back way too far. With the exception of the DS era, we maybe went through like 1 or 2 generations before moving on to the next major console, and because of that, it feels like they never got a decent amount of time to really get a handle on things before they had to move on to the next major thing. Back in the day, they were working with a much more limited toolkit, so they kind of weaved their way around that and managed to get by with some very solid games. However, it definitely got harder and harder to squeak by like that when it came to more demanding projects on stronger hardware. After the Switch 2 edition of Legend ZA, as well as that little glimpse we got of Pokemon Winds and Waves, it seems that we are finally seeing them get a little bit more of a handle on the Switch as a console and developing properly for it. And now we're kind of looking at a situation in where at the ass end of its life cycle, they seem to get a little bit of a handle on how to manage games for the Switch 1, and now the Switch 2, being a stronger version of that, seems a lot easier for them to work with because it's now familiar tech. And Pokopia seems to just be a different conversation entirely. Koei Tecmo just kind of has it down. They can do whatever they want. They locked it in with Pokopia. So I can for sure agree with you that they took a dive in quality when we entered the home console era. However, they are slowly but surely getting a little bit better each time with different aspects, just not as fast as people would expect. Next up, we've got the homie Lisa, who says, "For me, yeah, I think it's improving. We went from the black and white of the Game Boy all the way to the Switch 2 with so much color and vibrancy that couldn't be achieved with pixels, and now they have with the 3D graphics. As for story, I mean, I think it's improving with each game at the pace of a snail, because black and white story I still don't think has been beaten by the new games. Overall though, I think Pokemon is improving." So back to back there, it seems like people are of the common opinion that Pokemon Black and White still holds the crown of supremacy when it comes to Pokemon narrative. I think it is definitely debatable. I have said for quite some time now that I do think that as far as Pokemon narratives, Pokemon Black and White is absolutely up there in terms of some of the highest quality story we have gotten in the franchise. But I do appreciate that most modern stories have gotten a little more diverse in how they tell those stories and not simply focused around a simple gym challenge or one simple dedicated evil team that has one goal. And while I have made an entire video talking about the fact that it could be cool to have a more traditional villain back in modern titles with how they tell these stories, I do think that what we have more recently is a lot more nuanced, and we can get a lot more interesting and deeper stories as they continue to experiment with different plot lines and different themings and things like that. But I think that most of us can agree that it's been a good while since Pokemon has had us ask ourselves such a heavy morality question in which we're asking constantly, is what we're doing with Pokemon correct, morally speaking? That was one of the few times in our childhood that they tapped into a much darker narrative with the general plot of a Pokemon game that made us really think hard about what we were doing. And I think that stuck with a lot of people, and that's why it still holds the crown. Though, with this last generation of Pokemon that we've experienced, I think that if they really wanted to contrive a much deeper and much darker narrative that could really tug at some heartstrings, they could probably do that pretty easily if they wanted to. The only thing holding them back is the fact that they have to account for the much younger audience that's also participating within this franchise. Not that that should be an excuse. I have seen plenty of younger kids shows that have told very dark themes and narratives, but I feel like Pokemon Company is very particular in how they go about telling those stories, so they want to be extra cautious, so they don't have those same liberties. But going back to your first point, I do agree that them having access to a 3D toolkit now allows for much more vibrant and colorful stories. And Pokemon Winds and Waves might be putting that on full display, so we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Next in line seems to be Quayderic, who says, I think it is improving, but the progress is still too slow. It's like every generation improves two things and lets the rest fester for the next generation. And this here is another prime root issue, that the games themselves, while they do seem to be generally improving in a lot of little aspects here and there, it's not on a grand enough scale at a fast enough pace. A very common consensus and complaint is that we are paying AAA title price for games that don't feel like AAA title quality. As much as I enjoy Scarlet and Violet and Legends EA, I'm not going to sit here and act like they're of the quality of pretty much any other RPG I've played within the last couple of years. They are just simply not high quality enough games. And one of the scary things about this current industry is that when something doesn't sell well, there's a very good chance that they take the complete incorrect lesson from that. They go into panic mode, and instead of fixing up good concepts that are present, they completely remove them and replace them with something that doesn't work, or they just don't give it to us at all. And it sucks when you look at it that way. What also plays into this is obviously the get the game out before finishing the game mindset that Pokemon Company seems to have when it comes to this franchise. And unfortunately, even though they are under the Nintendo umbrella, they have their own way of running things, which means crunch is not something that they're completely opposed to. And that's how we end up with games that should feel and look much higher quality than they are. And it's very rare for Game Freak to be able to go back and touch up on a game to make it look and feel any better, which is why Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Switch 2 Edition is kind of an anomaly, because we never get stuff like that. But by the time we got that, it was way too late. Yeah, the game functions now, that's great, but people already have a bad taste of it in their mouths, and so we just had to wait for the next generation for a lot of these things to be improved, and that really sucks. So hopefully going forward they've learned that lesson. Winds and Waves, please save us. Next along, we've got Hydrator with the signature entire good and bad list. But you know what, I can't front you because I do this too. So I'm gonna sum it up. Starting with your positives, coming from a non-competitive standpoint, it does feel like the accessibility for competitive Pokemon has been getting a lot better, especially with the entry of something like Pokemon Champions. It feels a lot easier for newcomers in the competitive space to learn a lot easier. You also feel like they've been getting better when it comes to how they handle the main story and how they deal with sense of progress, and how there's a lot more to do than there would be in prior titles. And like me, you agree that the general 3D models have been improved a lot. They are a lot more expressive, there's a lot more animations, and even though there's no voice acting, when they talk, you can actually physically see them moving and expressing a lot more. On the opposing side though, you feel like modern regions are lacking more depth. We don't have much incentive to explore as much because there's just not as many hidden little nooks and crannies everywhere like there used to be in prior titles, because it's not as linear. You also feel that the general post games have been lost to time because they are focusing heavily on utilizing DLC as the primary post game going forward. And then lastly, you are a little frustrated that the Pokemon themselves, the more new ones that we get, are starting to feel more like human-like creatures than beasts or fantastical creatures like we used to get back in the day. But overall, it seems that Winds and Waves does appear to be a little bit more promising, and you're hoping that some of these things can be alleviated there. These are pretty much all things that I can agree with 100%, and as a matter of fact, the region situation, I want to make a video on that actually. I'm gonna definitely talk about that in particular because that is a very critical one. But that's the exact gist of it, that they are improving in some aspects, but there are a lot of things that feel like they've been lost to time or completely replaced with something else. You know, for example, like the post game for DLC instead. We have to pay for our post game now, and that's something that people are definitely not cool with, because we used to have these games, we would get them and be done. We would have these fantastic games with just so much to do and that would last us forever, as opposed to these games that are intentionally made with the intention of playing through the game and then waiting for more content to hold us over. And that's kind of ridiculous in a way. The Pokemon design situation can definitely be a little bit hit or miss, because there's always been like the handful of Pokemon that are more human-like, you know, like Slacking or Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, you know, there have always been those Pokemon, Machamp, you know what I'm saying? Like they've always been there. And there's definitely newer Pokemon that still feel like, you know, beasts or creatures and things like that. Although, again, some can definitely use some some design work, you know. I still don't know how I feel about Revavroom, even though I like using the Pokemon. Design-wise, though, it's very weird. And then, yeah, no, the exclusivity with pretty much like almost every Pokemon having a very specific ability and things like that. You know, like to an extent, it's cool. I could see them trying to get more experimentative and playful when it comes to how these Pokemon can be utilized based on their designs. But because of that, it's just so, it's so messy now. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, the percentages that you have listed here are very much accurate, in which a lot of these things are either hyper exclusive or completely unattainable. But yeah, no, overall, you pretty much hit that nail right on the head with pretty much every take here. Very, very accurate. Let's just hope that Winds and Waves can do a little bit better in the, you know, the post-game department and the Pokemon design department. Although so far, you know, Pombon, Gekwa, and Brout look absolutely fire. So hopefully we can see some general improvements. And, you know, Winds and Waves' first trailer that we saw months ago now has already done a little bit more in that department. So let's hope they continue that development. Next, we've got the follow-up with Scoobs, who says, the Switch era started off rough with Sword and Shield with Dexit, but that was bound to happen at some point. Story in Sword and Shield was average at best, but after that, excluding BDSP, the storytelling has improved a lot. Scarlet and Violet, its DLC, and ZA made me care for the human characters. Graphics-wise, I would say 3D has gotten better, still a lot of room for improvement. Weewah from the trailers looks so much better. Just hope it's not a trailer and it looks like that in game. Winds and Waves looks to have promise, just have to wait until the next trailer next year to see if there are any improvements. Other than that, are you ready to get your ass ate? I was literally reading that for the first time and I was like, wait a minute, what? And I realized you were referencing my damn short. Oh my god, Scoobs, that's funny, bro. It was a fruity slip, bro. I messed up, man. I'm sorry. Anyhow, yes, I know that probably most people would say that the Dexit was probably the biggest like indicator of the downfall. And the only reason I fully believe that one of the, or not the only reason, but one of the primary reasons for that is because not only did Sword and Shield come hot off the heels of Pokemon Let's Go, which had a very stylized art style to play around with, like something that was kind of akin to like the manga and stuff like that. Like it had a very unique art style that people were definitely loving. Going into Sword and Shield with graphics that did not feel like they held up nearly as well. And the reason for that is because they promised better animations and general quality because they don't have to work on so many Pokemon. And we didn't get that. It's because of the foolish promise that they made to deliver, and they just kind of they skimped on both ends. So it looked way worse than it was, you know what I'm saying? Generally speaking though, yes, you're right, there have been overall improvements on a lot of like graphical fronts, mostly in the, you know, character designs and the general art style, even though again, it's not as stylized as it could be in comparison to like, again, Let's Go. And this is coming from somebody that kind of has mixed feelings about Let's Go overall, but I feel like there's still a lot more room for improvement. But again, with the Winds and Waves trailer that we've seen, it's already been a couple of months since then. Hopefully they're doing everything in their power to make that game look as beautiful as they can. And we're off to a good start. So here's the hoping. And we'll save the ass eating for a later date, brother. Let's put that on the shelf. You know what I'm saying? Hey, yo, what up, Big Ledian? Let's see what you got for us. Story-wise, I think Scarlet and Violet and Legends EA have shown us they are attempting to write more mature stories, and judging from the one trailer we've seen from Winds and Waves, they do look like they are improving graphically. However, one aspect I don't think they have improved upon is challenge or options. They have removed set style and optional experience share. They still haven't tried to reattempt hard mode Generation 5, and the way they did open world, it still felt linear since there was a particular order they wanted you to follow. It's odd they can trust their audience with mature themes of parents dying and animal violence or family pet on the brink of death, but can't trust them with a small increase in challenge. Yeah, I think one of the things that most of us older fans find incredibly frustrating is that they refuse to believe that we could handle a little bit of gradual challenge as the game progresses, or that that off rip, there are people that might want to play with more challenge right from the get-go. It's this weird imbalance where they are more than willing to cater to their younger audiences by making sure that the game is completely accessible and easy for them to get through on a first try so that they don't put it down and never pick up another Pokemon game. But at the same time, they are giving us these crazier themes, much more deeper and involved characters in, you know, some cases more than others that we can relate to and things like that. But where's the balance there? You know what I'm saying? It's very, very strange. I 100% agree. And the fact that set style isn't a thing in the modern titles is absolutely bonanza to me. I really didn't even like completely process that until a couple of years back when I started doing this, that set style and stuff like that was even a thing, let alone that it wasn't available in more modern titles like that. Because what, are they afraid that some kid is gonna go in there, accidentally change the setting, not know what they did, and get frustrated with the game because they don't know how to fix it or something like that, and then never pick up another Pokemon game? I don't understand the logic in that. Like, just give options and make sure that the people playing the game know how to utilize said options. You know what I'm saying? Like, why are we not making this more accessible to everyone, not just to younger audiences? I don't know. It's ridiculous, but hey, at least somewhat graphically, we're getting a little bit better every step. So, I don't know. Just a weird thing that I agree on. Next, we got Chris, who says, while I admit that there are problems with Scarlet and Violet, it looks like they're taking their time with Winds and Waves. I think, like a lot of us, I'll always be going into the next Pokemon title with cautious optimism, only because, you know, we have been burned a lot of times before when it comes to this kind of thing, especially when it comes to expectations. So, unfortunately, even though things do look better on a much more general front, I have to keep my expectations level, because otherwise, you know, I think it's my own fault entirely if I feel like they are finally doing something better, only for there to be a lot of things that they don't get better with. So hopefully I'm right and that there are some things that are better overall, but, you know, I'm not going to be surprised if things still feel like they're a little bit stale in the development aspect. So we'll have to play that one by ear. Next along, we have the homie Crispy Boys, who says, I would say yes. I'm not going to say it's made huge strides over the last few years, but it's certainly improving. Graphically, I think Winds and Waves looks promising. Gameplay-wise, Scarlet and Violet showed the fun of an open-world Pokemon game, and ZA showed how they can tweak the battle system and still do something incredibly fun. Performance-wise, ZA was a nice step up from Scarlet and Violet, and I'm optimistic that Winds and Waves will do the same. Really, my only big disappointment, and where I'd say they've gotten worse, is with ZA's DLC. I could chalk that up to not being a regional title, and instead a Legends one, but that shouldn't be an excuse, especially with the price of the DLC. Slowly but surely, I'd say they're improving. I think I could definitely agree on the front that ZA did a lot of really interesting things, especially mechanic-wise. I feel like it had a lot of potential, but I think it squandered a lot of that potential with a lot of people because it, A, didn't do as much as it could have in the graphical department, making everything look very samey in pretty much every aspect, but also giving us post-game content in the form of DLC that was extremely repetitive and overall just not really worth it for a lot of people. And I completely understand that because, yeah, no, for the price that they were expecting, literally half the price of the full game is over half the price of the full game is genuinely kind of ridiculous expectations for a DLC that didn't really feel like it delivered, especially when it was just reutilizing a lot of assets and flipping it just to make it look like new, fresh content, you know? We did get a lot of new Mega Evolutions and things like that, and that I can definitely appreciate, but it's stuff like that that makes people very weary going forward with this franchise. Like, okay, like, yeah, Winds and Waves looks good, but what, are we just gonna end up getting another situation in which we don't have a post game and we have to wait till next year to get DLC that may or may not be good as our post game? That's super unfair to expect, you know? So when it comes to that aspect, it's a little iffy, but on a very, very general scale, we can only hope that what we're seeing with that first trailer from Winds and Waves is a indicator that we are looking bright in the graphical department at the very least. So I don't know. I don't think it's wrong to hold out hope, but yeah, let's be cautious about it. And then ending things off on the Discord side of things, we have the Dragon Scale Box, who says, we can all agree on this. It really needs to improve on the presentation aspect. Aside from few real cutscenes, there are in a sea of text box spam. That's what most people's issues with the franchise stem from. I wouldn't say that's all of the issues, just kind of rounded up into one, but I do agree that the first and foremost issue is absolutely its presentation. And I think it's definitely failed on a lot of fronts during the entirety of the Switch 1 era. With the exception of Pokemon Let's Go, which we thought was going to be, the future going forward. Like, we figured they were going to develop off of that, and they simply didn't for whatever reason, which genuinely surprised everybody. But from a just bare bones graphical and just presentation standpoint, as long as they can get that down at the very least, we'll be a lot more open to accepting a lot of the other things that they may have to offer with these games. So with Winds and Waves looking very decent from what we've seen a couple of months ago, and still having potentially a full year or two out before we actually have the game in our hands, we could be seeing something really, really extravagant in terms of graphical leaps and just general presentational leaps, right? So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. It seems like a lot of people in the Discord really wanted to get in on this one. That's very interesting. But either way, that just about does it for the Discord side of things. And I know that timer probably scares the hell out of you right now, because we do still need to flip it over to the YouTube side of things. So let's see a few opinions on what's going on over there. Kicking things off on that side, we've got the homie Ivan Zone, who says, Pokemon is still in a big rough spot, especially with Gen 9, making open world games that are barren and ugly. While Winds and Waves might try to steer back in the right direction, it still doesn't give me confidence it will be a stellar hit. New hardware doesn't guarantee success for fans. DP and X and Y are proof of this, so I'm remaining skeptical until then. This is an absolutely, completely valid way to go about skepticism when it comes to Winds and Waves. We are finally getting our newest game on new hardware, stronger than ever, most potential, the power output has ever been when it comes to Nintendo for, games like these. And we are still skeptical because every time we've seen this very specific situation, it didn't usually turn out the way that it potentially could have. So we are looking to this with very, very heavy, just general optimism, but skepticism as well. You pretty much put it perfectly. Also, when you're referring to Diamond and Pearl, are you referring to the original Diamond and Pearl or Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl? Because it sounds like you're talking about Diamond and Pearl. And I will not accept slander on my goat. No, Platinum is my goat, but still, I don't know. It still did some good damage for a reason, even if it is the slowest region, but I'll leave it alone. We'll see what you have to say later. Next to that, we've got KAT, who says, they seem to keep using fast dynamic shots without actually showing us shit. From past experiences, I don't feel like this will be the improvement I expected. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Game Freak, please prove me wrong and actually make a banger good game that doesn't bug out and look like poop. I think the particular situation here is that it's kind of weird, right? Because this is easily one of the better looking trailers that we've seen when it comes to getting something off rip, right? When we first saw Scarlet and Violet, it still looked very rough. When we first saw Pokemon Legends Arceus, it still looked really, really rough. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, this is one of the few times where we've seen the trailer and everybody had a general good thing to say about it because it didn't look overall bad. It looked very, very solid for the first time in a very particular situation like this one. So that's why things seem just a little bit more promising than usual, but I completely understand still being on the fence about that. But like you say, I would be more than glad to be wrong on the front that they are just showcasing the best angles they can just to get a good reaction out of us initially, right? So I mean, maybe they had to do that because it was still in early development. Who actually knows what the situation is there? But like I always say, everything that I say, whether it's positive or negative or criticism, it's all from a place of love. So hopefully they just continue to improve and we do actually have a really good looking game on our hands by this time next year. We'll see. Following that, we've got Raven Noon, who says, based exclusively on what they showed about Winds and Waves, yeah, they really need to catch up with the gameplay. Region design in the last games, especially Scarlet and Violet, the map was empty and lacked meaningful exploration rewards. And battle animations. I mean, they're capable of only fixing Pikachu's battle animation and calling it a day. I hope they use these 5 years of development to make the best game they can. Hopefully, greed won't strike again. Yeah, this region and map thing is definitely getting a more dedicated video because the more I think about it, the more I realize I haven't really delved more into that, I think, which is surprising because that's a very important aspect. But I do want to talk about that very, very soon because I definitely agree that going open world for the first time and it feeling like the least of a world that we've ever had in a Pokemon franchise was extremely disappointing. And then going right into Legends EA, where we were completely limited to just Lumiose, was extremely frustrating. So hopefully going forward, now that we are 100% going full open world with these next few titles, or with titles going forward, most likely, hopefully we could see some really, really stellar region design and actually have something to look forward to if we go out of our way to explore. And like we said, yeah, general battle animations and things along those lines could absolutely use some work, especially coming, again, off of pretty much any other RPG that has really dynamic like camera angles and full animations for very specific moves and things like that. I just feel like they could be doing so much more. And this is kind of like what we felt like the deck set was going to be the sacrifice for, and it just did not pan out that way. So I don't know. It's just very situational, I guess. I don't know if they have been in actual development for 5 years on this title in particular, but if they have, I can only hope that they have put every single one of those years and every individual month to good use. I really do hope and pray for these next titles. So we'll play it by ear, I fear. Next, we've got It Was Kyle, who says, well, as we approach the topic of whether modern Pokemon games are improving, we must look at what we had before in older Pokemon games. We sacrificed freedom for aesthetic, where the older games partially looked better but on older hardware. There was only so much you could have the players actually do. But in modern games, I feel like we sacrificed the aesthetics for freedom, as we can do more, do being the key word there, as we in fact do these things, but can we do them good? No, but we can still do them. I'm hoping Winds and Waves will be the exception to this, however, as the game looks good and seems to have freedom. Sorry if this makes no damn sense. No, this makes absolute sense. It's literally a conversation that's been ongoing for a lot of games that have been transitioning into either 3D or open world or so on and so forth. Sacrificing potential like aesthetic and linearity for more freedom and just generally more quote-unquote to do, as you put it. You put it actually very well. This is a common conversation amongst modern gaming in general. You go back to games like Xenoblade and you can see how much love and care they put into their open world and aesthetic all at the same time. They didn't have to sacrifice freedom for aesthetic or visuals, as opposed to something like Pokemon, which doesn't really have the time necessary to develop both at the same time, so it feels like there are times where they have to sacrifice one for the other. So while we did have like linearity and visual aesthetic that felt a little more proper in previous titles, it feels like going more and more into the open world or open zone aspect, it feels like we are kind of losing that, and they are sacrificing that for the sake of more quote-unquote content, which is kind of ironic when you put it that way, actually. It's the perfect case of bigger doesn't always necessarily mean better. Doing more things, adding more stuff, doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to turn out good. And it's just kind of frustrating because we're still waiting for them in a way to justify a lot of the changes that they've made after going 3D, or even now going open world. We need reasons to explore that world. We need reasons for these games to look the way that they do. You know what I'm saying? We need some more justification, and we don't feel like we're getting that, which is why people are so consistently frustrated. We just need a solid stricken balance, and so far, people seem to be under the general impression that Winds and Waves could potentially look like it is heading that way. So, again, cautious optimism, let's hope they do. After that, we've got Nolvian, who says, all we got for now was a single trailer, and before that, a divisive ZA DLC, but the one good sign I'm seeing is, of course, it being a Switch 2 exclusive. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's what I always tell myself. Yeah, that's kind of a very consistent sentiment that we've been going on for the last couple of years when it comes to pretty much anything related to Pokemon. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. It's kind of to just be expected at this point that there's going to be something drastic that's going to disappoint a lot of people when it comes to these titles. And again, like we've been saying throughout this entire time, we hope to be very wrong in the case of Winds and Waves, that there's going to be that one thing that drags it and bogs it down completely. But at the same time, this is Pokemon we're talking about. You really never know what they're going to come out swinging with and if it's actually going to hit or not. So we'll have to see. After, we've got Brian McNaught, who says, we've been waiting for the better part of 10 years for Pokemon to get this far. I mean, they're still behind, but 2016 ain't a bad place to be graphics-wise. That is genuinely hilarious, but you're kind of right. We have been waiting pretty much the entirety of the Switch era console for Pokemon to really showcase its chops, and it feels like it never really got the chance to do that. But I mean, at the very least, it does seem like at the slow rate that they are moving, we are getting just a little bit better every little step here and there. And I really do hope that moving into exclusively Switch 2 territory, not having to worry about balancing and, you know, splitting teams up to develop for more consoles or anything like that, completely focusing on this brand new hardware and actually having the time to utilize it will allow them to really, you know, put out everything that they have, pour every ounce of power and heart that they have into Winds and Waves to kick us off into the next major era of Pokemon with the double-digit generation. And lastly, ending everything off, we have the homie Victoria Steele, who says, stories seem to be improving. DLC is going straight downhill with the news surrounding ZA and how they don't want to spend as much time on them after Scarlet and Violet. As for the rest, I don't know, man. Scarlet and Violet was such a buggy mess that I can't say that they're getting better. ZA was something. It wasn't a buggy mess, at least. We'll see. Maybe it'll get better. And this general mindset right here is precisely why I wanted to make this a response video, because it's such a mixed situation based on what we've seen with Winds and Waves and what we experienced overall with Legends EA and Scarlet and Violet. Scarlet and Violet was so buggy and broken on release that it ruined a lot of people's perception of Pokemon as a franchise because of that. And even though they did do what they could to fix it, for a lot of people it really wasn't worth a $400 plus $500 plus console to justify playing it again, so they didn't really care to. I don't know how many people actually experienced the update, but at this point it doesn't matter. The perception of Generation 9's beginning is completely ruined after how it was released in that state. It was generally tragic. And then in the case of Legends EA, there's a lot of things that it really did kind of right, but there's too many things it also did wrong. And even though we did get a very polished, generally Pokemon game, there's still a lot of aspects about it that are a little too weak, especially in the graphical department and how they treated the overall city that we were stuck in, essentially, right? So it's always been kind of a mixed bag when it comes to perception of Pokemon, and going in the Winds and Waves, because of what we experienced this last decade, it's really hard to be completely optimistic, even though we did get a very solid trailer for Winds and Waves. So overall, it's definitely a play it by ear situation. I guarantee at the very least that this game is likely going to be functioning decently well, given the fact that we're getting it on very good solid hardware and that they are actually spending a little bit more time on it, given those extra potentially 2 years that it's gotten for development. So we're looking in a better place than we have in a very long time. So I can only hope and pray that this does turn out to be something solid. Overall though, based on what we've seen here, based on the polls and everything like that, I feel like the polls and votes were accurate in that most people can agree that in a lot of aspects, Pokemon is improving. It's just not improving fast enough or at a gradual enough rate for people to justify, right? And it really sucks to think that way, because they do have so much potential. They'll always have that potential, and they'll always have that fan base that's going to be with them lifelong. But if they don't start treating the people that play the games with more respect, it's definitely going to turn into something a lot worse, and it's going to be a very uncertain future from there. But hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me. So that just about does it for this one. I believe that I've gotten pretty much everybody that I wanted to get in this one, or actually I'm pretty sure I got all of them at this point. So I think we're good on that front. So that being said, I've said enough. I think you have my general opinion. I do agree that it's getting better, but it could use some work. But that's enough out of me. I'm passing the mic over in your direction, and I want you guys to tell me everything that you're thinking in the comment section below. Do you agree that Pokemon is generally improving, just not fast enough? It could still definitely use some work, and because of that, you're going into wins and waves with, you know, cautious skepticism and optimism all at the same time, and is creating kind of mixed feelings for you when in regards to the franchise? Or are you on the opposing side? It's not getting better, it's never going to get better, there's absolutely no reason to delve any more into Pokemon as a franchise, and we should stop getting our hopes up, and we should just move on from this franchise completely. Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I am always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, it does appear to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and do just that. I'd like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm gone. So thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor of taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time.